them are moralistic. Many of them have to do with the holy days. Many of them have to do with the nation of Israel as it's in the land, which you can't fulfill because you're not part of Israel in the land. We get that. But what else will you destroy? If there's something that you can do, and the scripture says do it, we do it. Because it's all prophetic of the coming of the Messiah. I'm throwing that out to say this. This is why we celebrate Pesach. Because it's a memorial forever, as it said, as I read to you. It's also a mnemonic to help us remember. Remember that song, of course. And you remember these things, and you teach them to your children when you sit, when you walk, when you rise in the way. Don't teach to them, and before you know it, they're celebrating everything pagan instead of everything prophetic. Yes, and you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children, your kinderlach, forever. For this night is for the Lord, to be observed by all the sons of Israel throughout the generations. And the Lord said to Moshe and Aaron, this is an ordinance of Passover, no foreigner shall eat it. Now later on in that passage, I'm going to say this real quickly. He says no foreigner shall eat it. But the rest of the passage talks about the difference between the foreigner and what is known as the ger teshav. In Hebrew, the term ger teshav means the sojourner who sojourns among you. So, there was a sojourner who sojourned among Israel. His name was Caleb. Caleb was the son of Jephunneh, a Kenizzite. The Kenizzites were to be dispossessed from the land when Israel came in. But Caleb is considered as one born in the land, because Leviticus says, the sojourner who sojourns among you, let him be considered as one born in the land. He's not saying you can't celebrate Passover. He's saying if you're just passing through, you can't celebrate. But if you come near unto Israel and make your abode among Israel, then this is for you. Because that's the point. And then he goes on to give instructions about the fact that you can't eat it without being circumcised. Because he wants you to take on the covenant of Abraham, so that you will be the adopted seed of Abraham. So he's not trying to say that foreigners should be excluded. He's basically saying that passerbyers. But if you decide to come in under the law of Moses and live as a Hebrew, because the word Jew isn't actually accurate, it would be the word Hebrew. The word Hebrew comes from the root word ibor, which means to cross over. Cross over Jordan, cross over the Red Sea, cross over into a new life. You are Messianic Gentiles and Hebrews. You have crossed over. Amen? Amen. Baruch Hashem. All right. Therefore, remember your former state as Gentiles, you Gentiles. By birth, at that time, you had no Messiah. From the book of Ephesians, from the book of the community of Ephesus. You were estranged from the national life of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants of the Lord's promise. Now remember, Paul is a Jew. There's no New Testament written. The only scriptures he has there is the Tanakh, as you would call it the Old Testament. We don't like that word. You were foreigners to the covenants of the promises of the Lord. You were in this world without hope and without Elohim. But now you who were once afar off have been brought near through the shedding of the Messiah's blood. So then, you are no longer foreigners. What a promise. You are not foreigners. You are brought, you're not foreigners, you're brought in. And strangers, on the contrary, are fellow citizens with the Lord's people and members of God's family. Again, remember, that's very reminiscent of the book of Romans 11. Now, I'm going to skip only for the sake of time, because we will be here probably at least a good 2.5 hours. I'm sorry, that's the Passover. Page 3. I'll be reading, you shall read after me. Leader, then the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do. Exodus 6:1. When the Lord spoke these words to a trembling man on his face before a burning bush, and that was not George, by the way, he revealed an eternal plan that would set his ancient people free from their captivity in Egypt. The same words have echoed through the corridors of time, even to us, who have been set free from the captivity of our sin. All!
I will bring you out from the yoke of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from your bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you from evil, and I will be your God.
Exodus 6:7. Now again, one of the reasons why I might be skipping a few pages is because I add a lot of commentary, because it's no good if you don't understand what you're doing. So I promise you, I'll do my best to speed it along, but you need to understand why we do what we do. At Passover, we remember. In Hebrew, we use the word zicharon, remembrance. And celebrate these great promises by drinking from 4 cups 4 times. Now, we're not going to do 4 cups at 4 times. Why? Because you'll be back and forth to the bathroom 4 times. So, do we have small cups? Little cups. Okay, you can do that. That'll work well. And we are going to fill them up. Usually we fill up a big cup and fill it and drink the whole thing and fill it again. But in this case, because I realized if you had small cups, we'll do that. We do remind ourselves of the relationship that the Lord desires to have with each of us. Now, do we have the candles on the table? Bill? Or are we going to have Mama light it? Sherry? We don't have it up here either. Huh? Do we have a candle? No.
Unless Chris knows of any, I don't know.
Alright, normally we light the candle of the holy days because as light is a line of demarcation, it sets apart from the darkness. This light is a setting aside and a line of demarcation between that which is the everyday, the mundane, and entering into the holy of the Pesach. Are we getting a candle or should I move on?
Move on.
Alright. And that has nothing to do with moveon.org, okay? Passover begins as a woman kindles the fire, the festival lights, and recites the traditional Jewish blessing. Now, the candle is lit, the mother lights it, and she says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'diburo. Oh, and we light the cell phone. I'll say it again. As we light the cell phone, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'diburo ubishmo anachnu madlachim hanerot shel yom tov. You may say that all together. No, I'm joking. All the women, go. All right. This is a technologically advanced Pesach. It is most fitting that the woman kindles the lights, for we are reminded that God's promises, when the Messiah comes, he would not come from the seed of man, but from the seed of woman, and by the will of the Lord, as the prophet Isaiah declared. Women! Who knows what that means, Emmanuel? That's right. All alike. And the glory of thy people Israel. The Passover has begun. Let us fill our cups for the first and of the 4 cups we will drink tonight. This cup is called the Kittish Cup. It comes from the root word kadosh, which means to sanctify or make holy. Kiddush is a ceremony that helps us separate and make holy the time and the events to follow. We say a thankful blessing to the Lord as we set aside common things for an uncommon purpose. Yeshua, and this is probably, this is Luke 22 as it says in the bottom, was the host for his last Passover, and he stood and sang this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pori hadafen. Amen. Say it together. Blessed, O Lord, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of vine. All with this cup.
With this cup, we are our Lord and Lord,
You're definitely not the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Or should I call them the Mormon Moron Tabernacle? It was concerning this cup in the book of Luke 22 that the Messiah declared, take this and share it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of Elohim comes. Now, we've already said the prayer. Let us take a sip of the first cup. We've already said the prayer. Or drink the whole first cup, it's fine too, because you'll be filling it up again. There you go. Boy, is my stomach empty. Now, this is where commentary comes in. When Yeshua celebrates the Last Supper, he is not doing a Passover Seder. Let me tell you why. It's confusing, because especially if you go to the Passover. You see, after he has the meal, he tells his disciples before, go talk to some guy, and he's got a donkey for you, donkey for you. And no, a room. So I'm thinking of triumphal entry. I'm sorry, my mind's blank. A room for you. Tell him the master needs a room to prepare the Passover. Remember this whole thing? And then they prepare the Passover. And then what do? They all come. They eat the Passover. Judas betrays him with a kiss. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane. He leaves. Judas leaves the room where they're having the Passover meal. And he betrays him for 30 pieces of silver. They meet him in the Garden of Gethsemane. He betrays him with a kiss. Throughout the entire day, they say, are you the one? He says, it is I. The guards fall back. I'm giving you a quick overview. And then they take him and they bring him to Pilate. They bring him to Herod. And he goes through trial. He does the beatings, the scourgings, the crown, the robe, the division of his garments. Remember all this? How can that be the Passover when he dies on Passover? It doesn't make any sense. So according to Talmud, and I believe this makes a lot of sense, this is what is known as the what is the, I'm having a mental block with the Hebrew. Seudat Mitzvah, thank you. I had a mental block. It's called a Seudat Mitzvah. And a Seudat Mitzvah is a celebratory rehearsal. It could be a celebratory meal when a rabbi finished the teaching, or it could be a rehearsal meal. He says, with desire, I desire to eat this Passover with you. But he can't be eating the Passover because he dies on Passover. And then he's crucified when, the Passover lambs are slaughtered. So the only explanation, if you read in the Talmud, and I'm not going to get into the tractates of the Talmud, is that it is a celebratory teaching Passover for the purpose of preparing them so that they will know that when it happens, all these things were fulfilled by Yeshua on the actual meal itself. I'm not going to get into more of that for the sake of time, but understand there is a biblical and a historical explanation. Seudat Mitzvah. Think of the idea of a bar mitzvah. Mitzvah having to do with the commandments. It's a celebration, a celebratory meal, or a teaching meal, and that's exactly what he's doing. So I'm doing that very quickly so you'll understand. Ritual washings have been part of Jewish life since the Lord commanded Aaron to bathe his hands and feet before approaching the altar of the Lord. All. Wash our hands. Now, do we have water in a pitcher for every table? Okay, so normally at this time, we take and we pour and serve, and pour into a basin, and everyone washes their hands. That's the salt water. Do not wash your hands. Do not drink it. If you're thirsty, don't drink that. You got bottled water. Yeah. Now remember what ends up happening during that time when he is with his disciples. What does he do? He washes their feet. Okay. Yet Yeshua carried this notion of servanthood one step further, so that on Passover that night in the upper room. So he rose from the table, removed his outer garments, and wrapped the towel around his waist. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his talmidim, his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that he was wrapped around him. He says, do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Yochanan, John 13:5, and also 12-14. And everyone at this moment in time would wash each other's hands is in service. The Seder Plate. There are many elements on the Seder Plate. I think we got them all. I hope so. If not, we'll fake it. Seder Plate contains the traditional symbols that help us tell the story. They are all symbols of the work of the Lord in the Passover. They are metaphors and symbols and prophetic displays. On the table, one of the symbols is the parsley. You remember you get this at the restaurant, and you throw it out. But Pesach is a holiday that comes in springtime when the earth is becoming green with life. This vegetable called karpas represents life created and sustained by the Almighty Lord. The life in Egypt for the children of Israel was a life of pain, suffering, and tears, represented by the salt water also on the table. And what we do is we take the parsley, we dip it into the salt water, hopefully it's good and salty, we mix it around, and we eat it to say, that the parsley, which represents life, is like a life immersed in tears. A life in slavery and in bondage is like a life immersed in tears. We say the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari ha'adamah. All.
Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the earth.
And now that we've done that, grab yourself some parsley. Remember the last meal you threw this out on? Make sure it's good and salty, mix it around. And I'm dipping the parsley. I'm soaking the table. Because the rest of the meal burnt, and that's all you get to eat. Hopefully that was salty enough.
That's not the right way. I saw a guy do that in a Seder. He did
Right.
7 of them down there before he caught my attention.
Now, page 9. All together, let us all say, what
Is the meaning
of the Hazeret? You see this elephant foot? No, I'm sorry. It's the horseradish root. It's not an elephant foot. I don't know. Who knows? I think it might be a prehistoric bone. Plus is the toe bone of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Fathers, all together now. This horseradish
reminds us
that life this represents the bitterness of slavery. Let us move on. Also, as we scoop, some of them will roar, and we have horseradish on there, right?
Yes. Yep.
We're going to take the bitter herb, processed of course. I will not make you bite this. And we're going to eat the bitter herb. And what are you going to do after you eat the bitter herb? What are you going to do? You're going to cry. You're going to cry. Cry about it. Because horseradish makes you cry. And the statement that is being made here that a life without redemption is like a life immersed in tears. As we scoop some of the maror onto a piece of matzah, unleavened bread, and eat it, we're reminded that the bitterness of sorrow that the children of Israel endured before they cried out to God. And how He redeemed them and brought them out of Egypt. And we are reminded of the bitterness of our lives before we were saved by Yeshua. We say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitishanu b'divavo v'tzivanu al akilat mahor. And all together now, blessed. And now, let us go ahead and take a piece of matzah. And let us cry about it. How come oh, here we go. Here we go. I'm going to break a piece of matzah. And I'm going to dip it in the horseradish. And hopefully it's good. Oh, okay. Seder's over. I gotta go to the men's room and wash my mouth out. Oh boy. Hey Bill. It wouldn't have been a horrible thing to give me a bottle of water. Yeah. Whoa. Alright, never mind. I am not responsible for anyone who dies. Woo, doggy. Where did you find that?
You like that stuff?
Okay. Anybody enjoying the bitterness of slavery yet?
Bernard, do
This will be the first and the last Passover you ever do. You'll all be dead after this.
I like that though. You said, are you ready for the baby to sleep?
Yeah.
I mean, the context. Again, the context.
All right. Let us eat the bitter herb. Okay. All right. Ready? David is now limping, as you can see, because of the horse radish. He didn't have that cane before he ate the horse radish. We have already dipped our vegetables once into the salt water. Tonight we dip twice. Now, obviously, remember this, just so you'll know. A Passover can go hours. We're doing an abbreviated Messianic version, but a Passover can be day time. Yeah, 7 hours at a time. Then the kids are dead before they get puberty. Yeah. They die before. That's the reason. Kill the kids before they become pubescent. We've already dipped our vegetables once into the salt water. Tonight we'll dip twice. The children of Israel toiled and labored to make beautiful cities full of treasure for the Pharaoh, working in bricks and clay. We remember this task in a mixture called charoset. It is made of apples, honey, nuts, grape juice, hopefully made of shevitz. Let us once again scoop some bitter herbs, and so we're going to take some horseradish. Yes. You will be sold into slavery. Onto a piece of matzah, but this time before we eat, we're going to dip it into the sweet haroset. Fathers, we dip. Fathers, you're not dead yet. Come on, let's go. Haroset. It can be sweet. All right. Now, dip a little into the horseradish, then put the haroset on it, and pray. This stuff would definitely kill a horse.
And again, remember, the Lord never wanted us to lose the stories, right? When you rise up, when you sit down, you talk about it in your house, but when we go through the Passover Seder, when we go through these feasts, it allows us, once again, to live the Bible. So they're not going to lose the story if they're living the Bible every year. How many of these are here?
Don't play around.
It came out okay. All right. Let us move on to a more palatable. Oh, you only have one egg. All right. So this part. Now I need to give you some quick thought on this. Nobody really knows the origin of the Hagigah. The Beitzah. Beitzah means egg. Hagigah is the name of the daily temple sacrifice that they did in Jerusalem. This is supposed to, I'm going to give this commentary instead of reading this. This is supposed to represent the daily temple sacrifice. It's brown, it's roasted to represent the burning of the sacrifice. We eat it because it represents life and represents the life of the daily temple sacrifice. But I'm going to be honest with you, as I have read and studied out, I'm of the persuasion that I think it might come from the Babylonian origin. I really do. I'm not saying it's horrible or even one second, Dave. But there's nothing in the scriptures that tell us to eat an egg during Passover. These are customs that came later on when the Jews were unable to fulfill because they either weren't in the land of Israel or they were away from the temple, and so they came up with these customs to represent the things that they did in and during the time of Passover. But remember, they didn't celebrate Passover from the time when Moses came into the promised land. All the men for the first Passover had to be circumcised in order for them to celebrate. The new generation wasn't. They were not circumcised till after they crossed over the Jordan River.
Did they put them to sleep back then when the men did that?
Yeah, with a little bit of schnapps.
Jeez, that'd be torture.
They weren't circumcised until they came over. And so they didn't celebrate the Passover.
Remember Shechem?
Huh? Yes, Shechem. They didn't celebrate the Passover until after they came into the land under Joshua. So there were a number of periods and times, and then they reinstituted the Passover during the time of Josiah and during the time of Hezekiah. They reinstituted the Passover because when they were in sin and living as a horrible life, they didn't. So there were many times when the children of Israel were not celebrating, or they were unable to celebrate, for example, in Persia and in Babylon. And so there were, some of these things came out of that because they were unable to, or didn't, etc., etc.
Hezekiah actually delayed the Passover
1 month.
1 month because he felt they weren't prepared.
Well, he said that the Levites and the priests weren't ceremonially pure, and they were defiled, and they didn't sanctify themselves, and so he postponed it 1 whole month so they could get ready. Those who would be ready would be ready. So normally what we do is we dip the hagigah, the egg, the beitzah, in salt water, reminding us that the daily temple sacrifice is dipped in tears, and we grieve for the loss of the daily temple sacrifice. I'm not saying it's a bad sentiment. I'm just saying there's nothing in the scriptures that commands us to dip an egg in salt water. So we separate the difference between man-made tradition and that which is biblical. Not everything man-made tradition is bad, but not everything that's man-made tradition is necessity. You have to compare.
Yeah. What does the egg mean in Hebrew or Aramaic?
Well, you're going to talk about the idea of
No, just tell me what it means
in Hebrew.
in Hebrew.
Go ahead and tell me, because I don't know where you're going with this.
The egg represents birth and rebirth because it travels just like our Messiah did. Comes out of the hen and is laid. An egg may not always be fertile, so you're praying for a chicken or a chick to come out of it. But what it does represent is Yeshua coming out of the human mother. Listen to me, and then I'll give you why. The second thing that it represents
Is the eternality of the cycle of
no,
life.
it always means a circle of life.
Yeah.
But the second
That's where I
thing
thought you
is,
were going.
when were the Hebrews born? Not until they went to Mount Sinai. And that is
They
in
got the
Exodus.
Constitution.
And that's why it's the egg.
Alright, here's again. I'm not saying that might not be the case traditionally. I'm just saying you can't find it scripturally.
Again, in Exodus,
Not the egg.
it talks about the birth, and
Yes,
it talks about
yes,
the birth of them.
But I'm talking about the egg on the Seder plate.
Right, but it's to represent
To
birth.
represent. I'm just saying, we'll fight that out, me and David. David and I are good friends. That's okay. That's okay to have these
His
ideas.
problem is he was raised only Ashkenazi. I was raised Sephardic and Ashkenazi.
Alright, the point is this. You can't find this as a biblical prescription. It's tradition. The representation that I was taught was that it represented the circle and the consistency of life. That's alright. Let's move on from there. You don't have to eat yet. Alright. Alright. Page 11. All under the shank bone. Alright, ready? All. Come back to me, come back to me. What is the guys, let's start over again, all together. What is the Zoroah? Alright, what we're going to do is we're going to dip the shank bone in salt water and eat it. Oh no, that's the wrong custom, I get confused. That'll be chip tooth on beef, okay. I'm joking, we're not eating the shank bone. This roasted shank bone represents the Passover Lamb. Now this is definitely more biblical, the shank bone of the lamb. Yet, since the temple in Jerusalem no longer stands, called the Beis HaMikdash, the lamb is not served at any Passover table. Instead, we serve chicken because it's cheaper. No, that's not either. Instead, we have a Zoroah, the shank bone, to remind us of the lambs that were sacrificed on the night of redemption. Their blood marked the houses of the children of Israel, signifying their obedience to God's command. Now, we need a reader. Is there a reader? Reader. You want to read? Okay. All right. Bill's going to read. Pastor, are you watching? Can you be reader too?
Sure.
Okay. Alright, reader 1, go ahead. It's page 12. While you're at it, enjoy the haroset and the horseradish.
Yes. On the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. The animals he chooses must be year-old males, without defect. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are able to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lamb. Exodus 12:3 and 5-7.
Read it through.
That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste, it is the Lord's Passover. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Exodus 12:8-11 and 13.
Now these are simply the instructions in what they were to do. Again, these are all symbols. I get it. But what you're reading is the actual instruction in what they were to do during the Passover. Now the concept of bringing, they called girding your loins, bringing your robe and tucking it into your belt, had to do with the fact they would take the front, pull it to the back, take the back, pull it to the front, and tuck it in. And why did they gird their loins? So they could walk and run without impediment. Because you got a gown, you look like Morticia from the Addams Family. The point really came down to the fact that he wanted them to understand, get out of town by sundown brown, leave in haste. Okay.
Real quickly, and I didn't know this until I read it, but amazingly on Passover, first of all, the firstborn of everything would be
everything. Not just
animals, Jews, Gentiles, it didn't matter. The saving grace was the blood.
Yeah.
He had to see the blood. And very amazingly, where the Jews were living in Goshen, none of those plagues happened.
Yeah.
None of them.
Alright. We are reminded by Moses that it was the Lord himself who redeemed the children of Israel from slavery. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and you'll hear that all through Scripture, with a great terror and miraculous signs and wonders. Deuteronomy 26:8. On that same night I will pass through Egypt, all, and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. For I am the Lord. Now remember this. Every plague was an attack on the deities and the false deities of the Egyptians. All. Strange comment that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Can you imagine what it was like in Acts chapter 2 in the upper room? You can't even understand each other singing the same thing in English. And yet they all heard them speaking in other tongues, giving praises to God. I'm just throwing this out. I believe it was not about speaking. I believe it was about hearing. That they weren't all speaking in other tongues necessarily as we understand them all speaking a different thing, but they were all hearing. Because you can't even really hear the words that we're saying. 3,000 souls speaking in some strange way a different tongue. And they all heard them singing and speaking the praises of God. It had to have been a miracle of hearing. That's just a stupid commentary that has nothing to do with Passover. Now, this is called the Manishtana. Why is this night, we say, all different from any other night? Now, we sing it.
Part, very important.
Yes, and I'm not going to do the whole thing in Hebrew. Again, this is an abbreviated teaching Passover, yeah. But we sing, and then we go through a whole series of questions where the Father and the Son will answer the questions So we're going to do this. I need a young child or a reasonable facsimile who reads well. Johnny, you read well?
Yeah, you read well.
All right, Johnny, you're a man.
Look at him.
It says, well, number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Talk about being on the spot.
Yeah. You can take off the mask. We don't mind. We should do it. Only reclining. Just real quickly, remember when Yeshua was with his Talmudim, his disciples, and he was talking, and the beloved disciple was leaning on him? The reason being is because they would recline on pillows. And they would recline on pillows because they were showing that they were now free men. And so it wasn't like he was sitting there going, so bud, move over. That wasn't it. They were reclining on pillows, leaning towards each other, not on each other, okay, just so you'll understand that. Fathers, it is both.
Privilege to answer these traditional questions of Passover. It's an opportunity to recite the mighty works of our faithful God.
The first Passover was celebrated by people enslaved, all.
Once we were slaves, now we are free.
The children of Israel were instructed to eat the Passover in haste. Their clothes on, their walking sticks in their hands, their sandals upon their feet, their bones charged, awaiting departure from the bondage of Egypt. Today we all may recline and freely enjoy the Passover Seder. All.
Messiah said, come unto me, all who are weary and carry burdens, and I will give you rest.
As they were reclining and eating, Yeshua said, yes, I tell you that one of you is going to betray me. They became upset and were asking him one after another. You don't mean me, do you? It is the one of the 12, he said to them, someone dipping the matzah in the dish with me. Because as we dip our elements into the salt water, it would be most likely the matzah into the bitter herbs or the haroseh. All right. Rabbi Gamliel, one of the great Jewish sages, said, he who has not explained the 3 symbols of the Seder has not fulfilled his duty. These are the Passover Lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread. All. On all other nights, we can eat any kind of bread we like. But tonight, we only eat this flat, dry, cracker-like bread called matzah. We know that this portion of the Seder is very old, recorded in ancient books in Aramaic. Yeshua probably used these very words as he led the Seder the night before he died. All.
This is the bread of affliction, for the bread which our fathers ate when he lived. Let all who are hungry come eat. Let all who are needy share in the Passover.
Continue. What? Fathers, some is related to the haste of when the people finally left. They left in great hurry. They didn't have time to bake or take for them, so they wrapped the dough in bowls, carried it on their backs. True as that may be, they ate unleavened bread before they left Egypt. All. Alright. Throughout the Bible, leaven is frequently employed as a symbol of sin. A small piece of bread from the previous loaf was pinched off and used to ferment the entire portion of fresh dough. Thus, the leavening of each batch of dough is related to the original loaf, and it was the leaven that caused the dough to rise. In the same way, we are related through the generations to the sin of our first forefather Adam. As the leaven in the bread causes the dough to rise, so the sin in our life causes us to rise and our own estimation to become puffed up. Real quick. So, Romans 3:23 says, all have and fall. I'll say this briefly. Sin is not merely the act that you do. It's a state of comparison between you and the Lord. Sin is a status. And because you are sinful in your state, which means you're imperfect, you sin in your imperfect status. You cannot come before the Lord in your imperfection. You need a covering. This is why we have the blood of the Lamb. Because it's not just the act that has to change, it's your very imperfect nature. Because guess what the Lord can't have in His presence? Sin. Or imperfection. And guess what you can't do with your imperfection? Stand before a perfect Lord without being... You remember, you watched Indiana Jones. Come on, your eyes will melt. You'll curl up like one of those mummies. And, you know, you cannot come before the presence of the Lord in your imperfect state and expect to live. Moses had to be covered in the cleft of the rock by the Lord. Who do you think you are? Isaiah said, "Oh, woe is me. I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live in a people of unclean lips." The great sages, the great prophets, the great men of God, they couldn't come before the Lord without a covering. You need a covering. I need a covering. We need a covering. And that's why when we understand the concept of the leaven puffs up. Sin puffs up. And we think we're all like, yo, I be all that, yo. It's not right for a Jewish guy to do that, is it? We don't do yo, we go oi, oi. But they're very similar. Yo, and oi, oi, you know. I don't know if you knew that. No cultural appropriation. Just so you'll know, we are at my congregation the most politically incorrect congregation you've ever come to. We just a cute little story. PJ and I, when we go, we hang out a lot and we go places. So if we go into Dunkin' Donuts, we always say, he's gonna come to prove it. We always say to the girls as we're getting ready to order our order, I'll say, "This is my twin brother," and the girls will sit there and go, and then I'll say, "Well, look at this." Yeah, I'll say, "Show it, Peach. Can you see it now?" And they sit there and they go. All right. I have no clue what that has to do with Passover. Where was I before I so rudely interrupted myself? Fathers, chapter, page 17. Those are fathers, go.
On this night, for the 7 days to follow, we eat nothing that contains any leaven. Demonstrate our desire to cleanse of our sins and lives devoted entirely to the Lord.
The Hebrew word for leaven is chametz, which means bitter or sour. The word matzah means sweet, without sourness. This bread shows us the sweetness and the wholesomeness of life without sin. It says like, but that was a typo. It shows the sinless, perfect life of the Messiah who would come and give his life for us after the destruction of the temple. I'm sorry, I lost my eyes here. After the destruction of the temple in 70 AD or CE, sacrifices could no longer be offered there, and the rabbi has decreed that this piece of matzah was the memorial of the Passover Lamb. All. Comments, so that you can be a new batch of dough. Because in reality you are unleavened, for our Passover Lamb, the Messiah, has sacrificed. So let us celebrate the Seder Comments. Comments of wickedness. Now I'm going to skip this part, and instead of reading and doing the liturgy, I'm going to explain, because you need commentary on this. So this is what is known as the matzah tosh. This is one of the oldest parts of the ceremony. It's a matzah tosh. No, I'm not going to do a magic trick. Watch me pull a matzah out of my hat. In the matzah tosh, there are 3 specific pouches, and matzah is inserted in them. Now I want you to know something about matzah. If I lift it up to the lights, you'll take note of something about the matzah. It is striped and pierced. 3 matzahs wrapped individually. And during the meal, if I can ever get this one back in, you beast, get in there. We take a middle matzah and we remove it from the pouch of the three, which is striped,
And
pierced, unleavened, and what we do is we break it, we put it and wrap it in what's known as the afikomen, and then we hide it. And at the end of the meal, the kids have to go and find it, and it's ransomed, and we pay them in order to get the afikomen back.
And you can't finish the meal without it.
You can't finish the meal. It has to be done in such a manner where it's got to be found in order for the meal to be complete. Now I'm going to say this, and this is, you let me finish before you beat me up. There is, in this tradition, now we don't know if this tradition comes before Messiah or after him. If it comes before him, it's prophetic. If it comes after him, it means that the Messianic community had a greater impact to the non-Messianic Jewish community than we could ever imagine. Either way, we win. But in this Matzatosh and Afikomen, we see a picture of the Lord in a way that represents Yeshua in a prophetic light that we almost don't see anywhere else. 3 matzahs wrapped individually. The middle matzah pulled out. All the matzahs are striped, pierced, broken. The middle matzah is wrapped. It's buried. It's hidden, and then it's resurrected. If that's not a prophetic display, then I don't know what is. And the one that finds it gets ransomed, gets paid, gets rewarded. Now, yes, here's the beauty of it. Now I'm going to say this. Let me finish. It's going to sound like I'm a heretic. I am a tick, and I am heretic. You see, I don't, and I stopped years ago, I don't use the word Trinity. The word Trinity comes from Tertullian in the 2nd century. But this is what I do understand about the Lord. I am unable to define him. I can only declare him. I don't know what the Trinity is about because no man knows what the Trinity is about. But I do know one thing. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 6, he says, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The word Echad in Hebrew is the word one. But he could have used another word in Hebrew, Yachid. Echad, E-C-H-A-D, in transliterated, means one in complex unity. Yachid means one in singularity. We would use the word Echad in reference to a batch of grapes, a cluster of grapes. I have a cluster of grapes. He doesn't describe himself as a Yachid, he describes himself as an Echad. He does not define himself. He declares himself. And so what I'm saying to you is, I absolutely believe this represents the nature of who the Lord is. Avinu Malkeinu, the Father, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Son, and the Ruach HaKodesh, who John declares they are one. Echad. He doesn't define them. He doesn't tell you and parse it out. He doesn't say, well, you got ice, you got water, you got steam. Oh, you got the egg, you got the yolk, you got the shell. He doesn't get into this foolishness. He just declares it because the Lord is transcendent beyond all our imagination. And the only thing we can do is look at the prophetic display, see that he fulfilled it, see what he declares about himself, say the same thing and say, I don't understand it. Because if you did understand it, you'd be God in your own mind if you understood how that worked. And thank the Lord I don't understand it, because that would mean he's limited. He's beyond anything that I could imagine. But one thing I do know is Yeshua is the Word. They are one. And that's good enough for me. I don't know the rest. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, it relieves me of the responsibility of having to define it. And then I can shut the mouths of all those cults who come out here thinking they're, well, you see, I'm a modalist. They come up with all these stupid theories of men. It's like, you're an idiot because you really don't know nothing. You know nothing. Well, I'm a oneness, universal, Pentecostal one. Every one of them tries to come up with some way to define the Lord. And I've learned years ago, I have no clue. I just declare them. They're one. Do I understand how in Revelation 5 that the Father sits on the throne? There's no one able to take the scroll out of the hand of him who sits on the throne. But Yeshua proceeds out of the midst of the throne. What is he, sitting on his lap? I can't. Revelation 7, the Lamb of God in the midst of the throne will wipe away all their tears. Hey, that is way beyond my pay grade. I am just not that smart of a fellow. And so I'm telling you, we do see the prophetic display. We do understand they are one. That he declares it, but we don't have a mental ability to figure it out. And so all we need to do is rejoice in the fact that he's beyond our understanding and praise him for the fact that Yeshua and the Father and the Spirit are one. Good enough for me, right? Give him praise. And it's not like he doesn't give us enough information to show. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, Bereshit bara, he singular, who is an Elohim plural, creates all things. Do I understand that? I don't think so. How do I understand? Let us make man in our own image. Who is he talking to? Because he's complex. He speaks to us in a way we can understand, but there's some things we can't understand, and thank the Lord for it, or I'd be God in my understanding, and that ain't gonna happen.
We're right in Genesis.
Huh?
Right in Genesis, we just quoted, we will make
Man in our image.
Our.
I don't get it. I just declare it. And thank the Lord. You have no idea when I finally realized that, how much pressure it relieved for me. The pressure of, oh, thank the Lord, I don't know.
I mean, you didn't have to be Atlas anymore?
Huh?
You didn't have to be Atlas anymore?
Thank you.
Alright, so, by the way, we'll skip that page. I think I went a little over. Alright, ready. The story of Passover. And then guess what? We get to eat. Woo! Alright. I need a narrator. Who can narrate for? Anyone?
I'll do it.
Alright, David, go ahead. You got it. Alright, I'll get you next time. Actually, there's a place for you. Wait, there's a narrator and then there's, yeah, you can be the leader. Alright, we're on page 20. Narrator, and you're the leader. I advocate. Good.
Okay. The Bible teaches that during a great famine in the land of Canaan, the sons of Israel journeyed to Egypt to purchase food. There they were reunited with their brother Joseph. Because of his influence, they were permitted to dwell in the fertile plains of Goshen. After the first house of Israel numbered less than 80 souls. But in the time their numbers swelled, their flocks increased. They became a mighty people, and there arose a new Pharaoh, one who did not know Joseph. He beheld the might of Israel. Fearful that in the time of war the sons of Jacob might join themselves with Egypt's foes, he subdued them and afflicted them with cruel labor. Taskmasters were placed over them to force them to make bricks and to build Pharaoh's great storage cities of Ramesses and Pithom. Despite their hardships, the Israelites continued to thrive, just as God had promised. This caused Pharaoh even greater alarm, and he ordered the slaughter of Israel's infant sons.
All.
House or
Housework.
the afflictions of the Jewish.
Wait. I had one. That's not all. All. House.
God remembered his covenant and raised up a deliverer, the man Moses. The Lord appeared to Moses in the midst of a bush that burned with fire but was not consumed. Moses drew close, took off his shoes, bowed before the presence of God. He listened to God, commissioned him to go to Pharaoh. Fearful and reluctant, still Moses obeyed and brought God's command to the king of Egypt. Let my people go. But the Pharaohs would not listen to the Lord. Most pronounced God's judgment on Pharaoh's house and on Pharaoh's land. Plagues were poured out upon the Egyptians, upon their crops and upon their flocks. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He would not yield to the will of God. He would not let the house of Jacob depart. With the 10th and most awful plague, God pierced through the hardness of the Pharaoh's heart. The Lord said, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits upon his throne, and even unto the firstborn of the maidservant who grinds the grain, and all the firstborn of beasts, and against all gods of Egypt, I will execute judgment. To protect the children of Israel, God commanded the head of each Jewish household to sacrifice a spotless lamb to apply its blood to the doorway of its home. First to the top of the doorway, the lintel, and then to the two side posts.
All.
Blood shall be
All right, leader, you're taking my place.
Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord.
Throughout
the generations, the Lord will celebrate as a permanent ordinance.
Narrator.
By the blood of the Lamb, Israel was spared.
All.
By the blood of the Lamb, Jacob was redeemed.
By the blood of the Lamb, death was made to pass over.
What a mighty act of redemption. What a beautiful picture of a greater redemption destined to come. For just as no bone of the first Passover lamb was broken, so none of the Messiah's bones were broken.
Just as the blood of the first Passover lamb was applied for faith, so the blood of the Messiah will be applied for faith to our hearts. And we worship God.
But because all of us, whether Jew or Gentile, may be redeemed from an even greater bondage through faith in the Messiah of Israel. Through the Messiah, Yeshua, we may pass over from death to life.
Now, during this time, we have a second cup. First cup is called the Kittish Cup, and the next cup is called the Cup of Plagues. So what we do, and we're going to dip our finger in the cup. Hopefully you'll do it in your own cup. And then we're going to put our finger on the plate and recite the plagues. We don't celebrate the plagues because the Lord, it's not His will that any should perish. But we do this realizing and remembering them, understanding that they were against all the gods of Egypt. And we will dip our finger in the cup and then we'll drink it, reciting the 10 plagues. We're going to do it together and then we'll say the prayer and we will drink the second cup. Ready, shall we? Ready, all together. Blood. Frogs. Lice. Beasts. Cattle disease. Boils. Hail. Locusts. Darkness. Death of the firstborn. And traffic jams. It is now time to drink the second cup. Urukata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei peri agafen, Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord Elohim, King of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. Take a drink. Amen. And then during this time, we sing a song that goes like this. Ilu Hotzianu Mim Mitzrayim, Hotzianu Mim Mitzrayim, Da'enu, Da'enu, oh Da'enu, oh Da'enu, 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 oh Da'enu, oh Da'enu, Da'enu. Now there's many verses to that. But basically what they are saying in page 25 is this. Men, let's all do it together. If the Lord merely rescued us, but did not judge the Egyptians, all. And the word Dainu means, it would have been enough. It still would have been good. All right, the Lord's good. All together now, ladies.
If he had destroyed their gods, but have not parted the sea.
Dainu. Men. Dying. If you'd only led us through the desert. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, ladies.
Led us through the desert, but have not given us the Shabbat.
Dying. Men. Dying. The Holy One provided all these blessings for our ancestors, not only these, but so many more. All. Blessed
are you, O God, for you have in mercy supplied all our needs. You have given us Yeshua the Messiah, forgiveness for sin, abundant life, and
Avinu Malkeinu Shem Hashemayim Ani Achevet Adon. We bless your holy name and thank you for this wonderful time as we get ready to eat our meal together. Thank you so much that we as Jews and Gentiles, one in Messiah, can celebrate. Bless your holy name, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. In Messiah's name, b'shem Yeshua Mishachenu. Amen. Bill, it's all yours.
Just
Dinner.
real quickly.
We're not done, by the way. We're going to eat dinner. Hide the Afikomen. Come back and finish, which is shorter. Don't leave. He will kill you.
You know, when he hides the Afikomen, which is broken matzah, the kids are going to look for it. And they're going to look for it as a team. And they will be rewarded monetarily.
Yes, we have provided for them an all-expense paid vacation to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. No, we're going to give them some money.
Most important, though, I need to let the boss talk for 1 minute.